welcome back to a new video and happy new year. It is 2024 and you know what that means. It's time to look back at every single book that I read in 2023. I read 44 books this year, which is an improvement from last year. However, some of those were kids books, middle grade books, as part of a larger series that I was doing, or Canadian Author Spotlight. So those were a bit quicker to read, but still, even if we take those out, it is a lot more than last year, and I'm impressed with myself. So without further ado, why don't we jump right into every book and what I thought about them. So the first book that I read was We Free the Stars, which is the sequel to We Hunt the Flame. I read We Hunt the Flame last year, and I actually started this book at the end of 2022, but I did not finish it until 2023, so I am including it with this. I absolutely loved this book. You already know that I loved We Hunt the Flame. I think it was a fantastic book. I absolutely loved We Free the Stars as well. It's so well written, it's so exciting, so enjoyable, and it's just such an underrated book, I feel like. I'm also very excited for the author's new book, which is coming out this year. The second book I read is The Excalibur Curse. This is the third book in the Guinevere Deception trilogy. I read the first two books last year, and again, read this one at the beginning of the year. It is, of course, the third book in the trilogy. It is fantastic. Every book in that series is fantastic. If you haven't read it, highly recommend. It's a wonderful read. If you like the show Merlin, I think you'll really like it. And if you want a fun twist on Arthurian legend with a focus on the women in the story, this is an excellent version. Now, the third book, this is another book that is a second or third in a series, and that is Defend the Dawn, which is the sequel to Defy the Night. I love Defy the Night, and I did enjoy this one too. You know, you've got this new pirate character, which we always love, but I didn't find myself as attached to it as I did the first book. I did prefer Defy the Night to Defend the Dawn. However, I did still enjoy it, and I'm really looking forward to the third book in the trilogy, which is also coming out at the beginning of this year, so very big stuff, very exciting things. My next book is one that I don't actually have with me because some of the books I read this year I borrowed from my sister or from a library, and that is Malibu Rising. I did not really enjoy this book. I'm not a huge fan of sort of realistic fiction. I'm not a really huge fan of just general fiction as a genre. I'm more interested in things like fantasy, sci-fi, stuff like that. I didn't really enjoy it. None of the characters were really good people, and I didn't find that really enjoyable to read. And I often find that with adult fiction over young adult fiction, every single character is dealing with addiction or adultery or something along those lines, and it's just honestly really depressing. I would rather just meet characters who are fighting dragons. So the next books I read were actually part of a series because I made a video about a classic book series that not a lot of people are talking about, and that is the Betsy Tacy series. So of course we've got the Betsy Tacy Treasury featuring Betsy Tacy, Betsy Tacy and Tib, Betsy and Tacy Go Over the Big Hill, and Betsy and Tacy Go Downtown. We've got this book which features the books Heaven to Betsy and Betsy in Spite of Herself. We've got Betsy Was a Junior and Betsy and Joe. We've got Betsy in the Great World and Betsy's Wedding. And we've got the spin-off book which features a brand new character but is set in the same city, which is Emily of Deep Valley. These books are super fun. I have read all of them except for Emily of Deep Valley previously, and so I enjoyed revisiting them. I enjoyed trying to get all of you interested in this classic book series that I don't think gets a lot of attention, and they're just fun, cozy, enjoyable reads. Next, we've got ourselves another trilogy, and that is the Shadow and Bone trilogy. Shadow and Bone, Siege and Storm, and Ruin and Rising. And I read these books in preparation for season 2 of Shadow and Bone, which, if you've seen my video about that, you know was fairly disappointing to me. Of course, Shadow and Bone, it's a classic, it's a fun series. So the next one is another book that I borrowed, and that is The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. And this is another book that I borrowed from my sister, and I'm realizing that the two of us have very different book tastes because I didn't really enjoy this one either. I found it very tedious. I didn't think very much happened, and I found a lot of the characters really annoying. A lot of the story was just very repetitive to me. Didn't really enjoy it. Another book that I read this year that was so exciting to me was The Curse of the Spectre Queen. So this was sold to me as a sort of female Indiana Jones type book, and I didn't really get female Indiana Jones from it, but I did really, really enjoy it. It's about this girl who is finding this sort of cursed item and like is trying to save the world. It's honestly so much fun. It's set in, I think, the 1920s. It's a super fun book. It's just super cozy and enjoyable, and it's been a long time since I've read a book like this, and I've had so much fun reading it, and honestly, it's just so enjoyable, and I highly recommend if you're looking for an easy read that's a lot of fun to go through. Another book that I would highly recommend is this book, Slay. It is so incredibly fun and interesting, but also it keeps you on the edge of your seat. And it's about this girl who creates a video game that is specifically celebrating Black culture and is sort of meant to be this safe place. And when it gets out that this exists, suddenly it is being accused of being exclusionary, and she's being attacked, and people don't even know that she's the developer of it. It's such a good read, and it has such an amazing plot twist. I was reading it while I was at the hair salon, and genuinely I was sitting there just in public with my mouth jaw on the floor because I was so in shock. It's a fantastic read. I highly recommend you read it, especially if you love video games, especially if you want to learn more about like why safe spaces are so important. It's fantastic. And Brittany Morris is also a video game writer as well. She did some of the writing for the new Spider-Man game, so very cool. So after Slay, we get into the other children's books that I read this year, and that is the Legend of Rhyme series. The first 3 books, Allure of Stone, Into Correra, and Tegan of Tomorrow. These are written by a Canadian author. I highlighted these for a Canadian author spotlight series. And they're a fun little book. If you're looking for some children's book that you're trying to get some kids into fantasy, it's definitely fun. It's obviously quite easy reading because it is a kid's book, but it's fun. It's got an interesting world and a building system. If you want to hear more about it, go and check out that Canadian Author Spotlight. I definitely think that if you're looking for local authors to support, this is a great way to do it. All right, next we've got another trilogy. This happens to be the year of trilogies for some reason, and that is the Caraval trilogy with Caraval, Legendary, and Finale. I enjoyed these books a lot. They were really fun. They had an interesting world. I definitely found that the first book was probably my least favorite. I loved that in Legendary and Finale we got to dive more into the lore that is introduced in the first book. And definitely in the first book I found Scarlet's sister to be very annoying. I find her having no self-preservation skills. I find her very irritating, and she is the main character in Legendary, and so I was really worried of going into that about how I was going to feel about that. But I actually really enjoyed it, and I really enjoyed her. I felt like once we had time to have her actually fleshed out, it was a little bit more enjoyable. All right, so next is a book that I read for a movie, which is The Knife of Never Letting Go. What more can I say? I think I've read this every single year since I started doing these videos. I love The Knife of Never Letting Go. I love the Chaos Walking trilogy. It is fantastic. The movie sucks, which, you know, if you've watched my video on that, do not watch the movie. It's awful. Read the books instead. They're fantastic. What more can I say? Another trilogy time. 2023, the year of the trilogy. 23. 3. All right, and that is the Lord of the Rings trilogy with the Fellowship of the Ring, the Two Towers, and the Return of the King. It's very unsatisfying that this has a different cover design than the other two. I know. What can I do? I got them at thrift stores. I enjoyed these books a lot. I read these for the first time this year. I made a video about reading them for the first time in my experience. I do think they're super, super heavy books. You're dealing with a lot of really complicated topics, but it's made even more difficult by the fact that you are being introduced to so many characters and so many places, all with names in a language that you have never heard before because it doesn't exist. And the world building is incredible, but again, I do think that on a first read through, it's difficult to catch everything. And it was really nice to see in the comments of that video that some of you had difficulty comprehending some of the stuff that I had difficulty with on my first read through as well. And some of you were also very kind enough to help me out and try and explain stuff to me, which I am still a little bit set on some of my opinions on it, but maybe on a second and third read through, those will change.
So the next book I read, I actually forgot to include in the original video because it was another one I borrowed from my sister, so I didn't have it on me, and I just forgot that it wasn't there. But it was called Project Hail Mary. It was written by the same guy who wrote The Martian, and I actually liked it a lot better than The Martian. The ending was a little bit dumb to me. I didn't really enjoy the ending, to be totally frank, but I did actually really enjoy the book. It was really fun. It was really interesting. It follows this guy who's sent on a mission to try and save Earth, but he has absolutely no memory when he wakes up. Getting to see him try and figure things out, regain his memory through these flashbacks that we get to see is really, really interesting and really enjoyable.
The next book that I read was Pandora. This is a fun little Greek mythology book. I was really drawn to the cover of it, and of course Greek mythology, who wasn't drawn to that? It was really fun. I wasn't as in love with it as I was with some of the other books that I read this year, but it was still enjoyable. It was still interesting. I thought that Dora, who's the main character, she's a really interesting character with a lot of ambition. I will say the ending sort of threw me off. There's some stuff that doesn't necessarily make the most sense. There are a lot of plot holes in this book, but if you're willing to look past that, then it is still enjoyable enough. Next is another reread for me, and that is Persuasion by Jane Austen. I'm a big Jane Austen girl myself. You know I love her. I was rereading Persuasion because I wanted to watch the movie. The movie, again, is awful. This is also the year of bad movies, apparently. Persuasion is such a fun book to me because Jane Austen is known as a satirist. She's known for her very funny books like Pride and Prejudice, Emma, Northanger Abbey, and there is definitely some satire and poking fun at that sort of stuff in Persuasion, but Persuasion is known as her most serious book, with a character who is the most mature of all of her heroines. I just really love Anne Elliot. I think she's a really interesting character. I think she struggles a lot through this novel, but she is kind nonetheless, and I love that. And I love that she's able to be kind and mature and dignified despite the fact that she's struggling inside, and I love that. And the movie ruins it. So again, read the book, not the movie. Next we get to another Greek mythology, and that is Lore. This is a book that I borrowed again. This one was so much fun though. I loved this book, and it was so enjoyable. I could picture everything as if it was a movie happening. It was so easy to picture what was happening. The characters were interesting. The action was exciting. There was big plot twists, and it was so much fun. I love this book. I want to read it again. I so enjoyed it, and I've wanted to read it for a while. I remember it being one of the first books that I saw on Instagram that I saw was coming out, and I thought, I need to read this book. It looks so interesting, and it so was. It completely held up. The next book I read is Ella Minnow P. This is a really interesting epistolary novel, basically meaning it's told through letters. This book is about an island that sort of worships the guy who wrote the first ever phrase containing all of the letters in the alphabet in the shortest amount of space possible. And when letters start falling from his plaque, they believe that it's a sign that they need to stop using those letters. And it's a really interesting commentary on totalitarian governmental forces and, you know, the power of individuals and the power of words, and it's just really enjoyable. I think it's such an interesting book that so many people have not heard of, and I highly recommend giving it a read if you have a chance. All right, and now we get to what I would call my favorite book of the year, and that is Illuminae. This is a science fiction book about these two teenagers who are trapped on these transport spaceships to escape an attack on their home planet. However, this book is told entirely as sort of a dossier of evidence for the events that have happened since the attack on their planet, since the AI of these ships going crazy. It is so amazing. I picked up this book because I heard about how cool the formatting was, and I love sci-fi. And I was so excited to give it a read. It looks super thick, it looks intimidating, but the thing is that some of the pages are really not that long. A lot of them are text conversations, some of them are, you know, there's schematics of the two spaceships. Normally when I have something like this where it's highlighted by the amazing formatting choices like this, I'm left thinking that it should be left in this form. Because the form of it is so integral to the way that the story is told, it oftentimes leaves me thinking this should never be adapted to a visual format, but honestly, I want this as a movie. Like, this could work as a movie, and I want it as a movie because it is so good. It's amazing. I highly recommend reading this to anyone. It's definitely really dark at times. It left me just in shock at different moments, but I love it so much. All right, and then the final books that I read this year, not a trilogy this time, but a full series. And that is the 7 books of the Chronicles of Narnia series. The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, Prince Caspian, The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, The Silver Chair, The Horse and His Boy, The Magician's Nephew, and The Last Battle. Fun fact about these books, I read them all in a day. Yep, you heard that right. I read 7 books in a day. I did a readathon a couple years ago, reading the entire Time Quintet in a day, and I decided let's step it up a little bit and read 7 books in a day. I'm in the process of editing it, and you will see it next week, I promise you. And if you want to hear my opinion on those books, you can listen to it then. But what I will say is that this is just a classic book series. This is a series that got me into fantasy as a kid, and it's always really nice to revisit them. It's been a while since I've read them, so definitely I had forgotten about some of the details of these books, so I'm excited to share those with you guys next week in that video. But that is every single book I read this year, everyone. I hope you found that interesting, and maybe I gave you some ideas for books that you can read as well. Out of them, again, my favorite, definitely Illuminae. It was a fantastic read. I'm really glad that you guys have joined me for another year of this, whether this is your first time watching my videos or whether you've been watching it for a few years now. I'm really glad you're here, and I'm really excited for what comes into next year. I already have some plans. I know I said that last year, and I started working on them, but they're really big projects, so there'll definitely be coming more. I'm glad you all enjoyed reading the Lord of the Rings for the first time. I have some other book series that I want to read for the first time, and I'm hoping that you'll enjoy them. Some of them are more popular than others, I know, but we'll see what happens there. And I also have a really fun scripted video planned, hopefully to come out in a few weeks. I hope you'll stick around with me and bear with me as we go through these changes of what this channel even is. But that's it for me today. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please feel free to stick around and watch some of my other videos and stick around for my videos in the future. I'd also love if any of you wanted to comment. Tell me what your favorite book was that you read this year, and tell me if any of the books I mentioned sound interesting to you and maybe you're adding them to your TBR this year. I would love to hear from all of you. But that's it for me today. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see all of you lovely people in the next video. Bye!